we have built the world's largest functioning hammer.
Oh, yes! That's so cool. That is proper blowing my mind.
Nudge in 3, 2, 1.
Oh, here we go! Oh!
Jack, welcome back to the program. We've been live when all of this broke. In fact, it broke with Tulsi Gabbard just leaving our airwaves. And so we wanted to just get your top line on this Durham Annex. Have you been able to review it? And what do you see inside of these documents?
Yeah, Benny, so the top line is this, and I've been able, just in the few minutes that I've been sort of watching the program and scrolling through as fast as I can, the top line is this. This is a litany of criminal acts. These are criminal acts. And I've said for over a year at this point that if we do not do anything about this now, if we do not respond with indictments, if we do not respond with grand juries, if we do not respond with prosecutions, they will do this again. They will do this again the next time, whether it's a J.D. Vance or a Tulsi, whoever it is that runs again on the Republican side, this will all happen again if there is not a response. So period, full stop. And yes, I've been through quite a number of this. This actually confirms a lot of the reporting that's in there. What's very interesting, there's some cracks that appear to be relevant that are now coming to the fore, things that we've seen in the past that are now really illuminated because of this release. But Benny, when you put all this together, this is a litany of criminal acts, and we don't exactly have the right nomenclature for it yet because these types of things haven't occurred before in American history. But really, seditious conspiracy, I think, is the only thing you can call it. Because, look, people need to remember, the way it was supposed to work is this. Hillary Clinton was, quote unquote, supposed to win the election. This was never meant to hold up to any type of scrutiny whatsoever. She was supposed to win. She was going to get into office. This was just an election, dirty trick. This was a dirty trick. It was meant to be the October surprise, and it worked basically like this. Hillary Clinton sitting in a room saying, and remember, go back, put yourself back in the context. The FBI had Hillary under investigation for all of 2016 because of her use of the email server. This was a recurring narrative all throughout 2016. And those emails, by the way, have never been publicly released in full. Julian Assange never released them. Russia, who may have had, and we're seeing a lot of indications that Russia did have access to these emails, they did not release them. So the Hillary Clinton emails have never been released. John Podesta's have been released. The DNC emails have been released. But I need to keep hampering on this because it gets lost in the mix, and we need to be clear. Those emails were never released. So she's sitting in a room saying, they've got me under investigation. I want to put him under investigation. That's the genesis of all of this. And so this becomes the reason, it becomes Russia. It was never meant to hold up to any scrutiny. And then in the waning hours, we see this election dirty trick is then meant to be injected into a poison pill to try to remove Trump from office to create essentially a nullification project of his first administration by generating, which of course led to an impeachment and the Mueller investigation, which of course, even though the impeachment had nothing to do with this predicate information. But, scroll back all the way. They did this because they always thought they could get away with it. They did this because they never thought that there would be a response. They thought that they had, hey, we have control of the media. We have control of all of the intelligence agencies. By the way, I'm one of the only guys out there who can say I was serving in the intelligence community in 2016. So in a very limited capacity, I wasn't on any of this stuff, but I had access to the classified ICA when it came out. It made no sense. I read the entire thing when it came out. It made no sense whatsoever. I've never seen something like that. They were making because it's really as simple as this. I've never seen the intelligence community create a product that interfered in domestic politics. It's just not what we do, right? We talk about China, we talk about Russia, we talk about North Korea, we talk about Iran, certainly we talk about terrorist organizations, and thank God Joe Kent is now running NCTC over there. But we don't get involved. We're not supposed to. We're actually limited by law from getting involved in domestic politics. But if you're able to claim that somehow domestic politics are being interfered with by a foreign power, a hostile foreign power, like say, oh, I don't know, Russia, and let's say you want to start a proxy war with Russia because you're trying to gin up hostilities with Russia, then what would you do? Well, you would blame that Russia hacked the election, that Russia stole the election, and you would try to create a wellspring of support for a war with Russia, a proxy war with Russia, which was supposed to begin in the Hillary Clinton administration. What did we see? It began under the Joe Biden administration. The plan was in place all along, but Donald J. Trump came down the escalator and screwed everything up. So zoom back in a little bit. When you put all this together, the Durham Annex, the 19-page, and everyone needs to go and read the 19-page whistleblower disclosure that was released by the DNI this week. You've got chapter and verse of senior-level intelligence officials, nonpartisan, apolitical intelligence professionals saying from the start, what you're doing makes no sense. I can't sign off on this. I don't see any evidence of what you're talking about, that Russia interfered or hacked in any way other than, probing systems. And by the way, we have evidence of lots of countries probing our systems. They do it all the time. And in fact, we do it to them. It's called cyber operations. It's something that goes on constantly in cyber warfare. And yet they excluded all the information of other countries doing this, China, Iran, North Korea, et cetera. And this goes all the way back to 2016. So you've got people being forced to sign off on these documents from the highest levels. I've never seen anything like it. I've never seen anything like this. So you've tied that to this annex that comes out, the perjury that goes on and on and on throughout the last 10 years or so, and the fact that we've been told, and remember, we were already told, there was that leak, I think it was to ABC, that criminal investigations have been opened on Comey and on Brennan. And I am told that there is already a plan in place to make sure that this investigation centers on things that are elements of the conspiracy that occurred outside of Washington, D.C. And that the DOJ is well aware of the issue. And this is something that I've been raising over and over on Twitter, on my show, Human Events, that, hey, if we bring this in D.C., because I sat through all of those trials for Stephen K. Bannon, for Roger Stone, for General Flynn when he was in for his hearings. No D.C. jury is going to convict anyone with a D next to their name, and they'll convict everyone with an R next to their name. Remember, I think there was a 100% conviction rate for every single Jan 6 trial that went up. 100% conviction rate. And so they know full well what the cards are here to play. So if we're breaking any news, let's break that they understand very well that the elements of this conspiracy that took place outside of Washington, D.C. allow them to impanel members and investigations also outside of D.C.
How do you carve up something like this? You elucidated for us beautifully how unprecedented this is. It's clearly the biggest political scandal in my lifetime, for certain. How would you actually charge this?
Yeah, hey, Benny, just want to double check. Is that any better?
Sounds much better. Thank you, Jack.
Awesome.
It was at a whisper. We thank you.
So, look, seditious conspiracy, let's go back to the Proud Boys, right? So the Proud Boys were facing, in some cases, 30 years for what they were put through. And excuse me, I should say what they were in many cases pushed into, what many cases ended up being not something they had done at all. This is totally separate from that. This is we are looking and following the evidence where it goes. We are following the evidence now to see these direct lines, chapter and verse. And so here's what I would say. You go with the seditious conspiracy charge, you go for perjury charges for anything that's within the 5-year range, got that. But here's the other part of it that's so juicy is, ladies and gentlemen out there, if your last name is Brennan, Clapper, Comey, Lynch, by the way, the first one to flip gets the best deal. And James Comey, he wrote about this classified Durham Annex in his book. A lot of people missed this, but I went back and read James Comey's book, every single page of it, so you guys don't have to. And he mentioned specifically that tarmac meeting that took place between Loretta Lynch and Bill Clinton that happened during the 2016 election. And he said there were things that she was doing that questioned that raised questions for me about her independence. Well, what was he referring to? He was referring to the fact that, and look, guys, Comey's a squish. Comey is, as they would say, not exactly the type of guy who would hold up under questioning. They are rats. They will all flip on each other. And James Comey is absolutely the kind of guy who is going to flip, and he already showed that crack in his book. And by doing so, by putting that in his book, he's showing you that he's willing and he wants to go after Loretta Lynch because he's upset because he thinks she screwed around in his Clinton investigation. And so he's always been upset about that set him on this other path where half the country now hates him. Remember, he thinks he's the last Boy Scout. His psychology is totally something where he thinks he's the last man standing. He doesn't like Republicans, or he certainly doesn't like Trump, but he loves himself. And that's the key to his psychology. This is, some of the behavioral profiling they teach you, in Intel. And so what you want to do is use that to flip him. Use that to make him a witness against the others. Hey, take a plea deal and it will go easier on you. And then you just work your way up the chain. I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing that going on. And I certainly wouldn't be surprised if we start see that happening again and again with all of these officials. Because I think Comey was a guy that they brought in towards the end of this. I think that this was cooked up by Brennan and Clapper and those guys, and then they bring Comey in at the very end.
They seem really nervous if you look at their public statements. Even the Obama statement is utterly nonsensical. It doesn't make, clearly written under duress.
I've never written by ChatGPT.
Oh, yeah. Out of respect for the White House, these people are bastards, in the White House. It's a wild statement. And they seem to be spooked. The spooks seem to be spooked by this. The behavior has been very often. There's been a lot less yapping than you would assume. They haven't been out talking about it, which is a major tell, actually. That they're not trying to sit there and defend themselves against this. It seems like they're entrenching, and we might actually, we might have actually got these bastards this time with the Soros connection. I'm wondering, Jack, have you read into that? We have the documents right here, and you can see that they're working with the Soros Foundation over what you would assume to be funding of the Steele dossier. Somebody has to pay the millions of dollars to go get this Russian disinformation. Somebody has to pay Christopher Steele and Fusion GPS. So what it looks like is at the very least a co-authorship or a potential understanding between the Soros Foundation and the Clinton campaign that this was an op they were going to run. What is the culpability here for the Soros Foundation?
Well, so this is where you got to follow the money. Remember, Hillary Clinton's campaign had to pay a massive fine for not reporting the funding of the Steele dossier and the work by Perkins Coie and the work by Fusion GPS that was eventually funded through them. They never reported any of that to the FEC. So this all accounted for illegal in-kind contributions, and she had to pay a massive fine for that. And we never. But here's the key. The Clinton campaign, just like all political campaigns, is a donation-based campaign. So that wasn't like she put the money in herself. And of course, we know the Clintons are broke. These are the people who stole pieces of furniture and silverware from the White House on the way out. That's just who they are. They're trash. And so the point is where did that money come from? Where did the initial seed money for the funding of this come from? We never really got that information. Mm-hmm. It's just always sort of been, she was well funded. We were able to, fund it from the Hillary campaign. But what if, and as we're seeing through these emails, and I'm just sort of going through this in real time as well, look, you follow the money. You follow the money and then you pull them in as well. Because remember, John Podesta also had to testify for this over and over. And by the way, the best part of this, when John Podesta had to testify on that question of all, was who was John Podesta's lawyer for his testimony during all of this was Mark Elias. So Mark Elias was operating in a personal capacity as John Podesta's lawyer at the same time that Mark Elias had been the Clinton campaign lawyer, right, in the campaign capacity, who hired Perkins Coie and Fusion GPS in the first place. So the investigators are talking to John Podesta. He said, I have no idea about this. No, the person they should have been asking was sitting next to John Podesta because it was Mark Elias all along. And of course, he never once raised his hand and answered the question to say, well, actually, I was the one that hired Perkins Coie. So guess what? Guess what? Did Mark Elias lie in deposition? Were there any statements that Mark Elias made? Were they client directed statements that Mark Elias was purview to that concern the suborning of perjury? Did Mark Elias ask John Podesta to lie in his deposition as a lawyer? I think Mark has some explaining to do, certainly explaining to do on all of this. And when it comes to the Soros Foundation, when it comes to anyone who is tied to the funding of this, you got to haul them all in. You got to haul every single one of them in. And I'm talking in some cases perp walks, in every case subpoena, because it's absolutely clear. And the minute that you start shaking this tree, that's why they're scared right now. The minute you start shaking this tree, you are going to see people crawl out of the woodwork. That's why you're seeing this whistleblower now, who, by the way, and I really, he or she, I don't know who it is, but this DNI whistleblower will absolutely be a star witness on the intelligence side. Because here's the other trap that they're going to do. And I can already see this coming from a mile away. They're going to claim that Barack Obama's actions were the actions of the president. And the Supreme Court ruling last year, of course, was what? Presidential immunity. So the president has immunity for those actions. And they're going to claim that we were acting on the orders of the president. And as such, our actions are also covered by presidential immunity. That's going to be the play. So I can already see that coming a mile away. And the key here is, what was the presidential action? Is it a presidential action to order the rewriting of an intelligence community assessment to try to smear and derail your incoming successor? No, that's not a presidential act. That's a personal act. So the first hurdle that any of this is going to have to pass is getting past this hurdle of presidential immunity to say, no, Barack Obama was operating outside of his presidential duties while ordering and being a party to all of this.
Yeah, you bring up a great point with John Podesta. You bring up the email hack that sort of got this entire ball rolling. It's mentioned here in the documents and how they're trying to cover up from the Hillary Clinton email scandal, the DNC leak. None of these documents point to any outside hacking of the DNC. And in fact, CrowdStrike said they were the ones hired to come in and do the cleanup operation, and they couldn't even really pin it down. And so what does this say about the emails that were released, the Podesta emails and the Hillary Clinton emails? I mean, are we going to be reopening that, Jack?
I think it's all up for investigation. And look, those files, remember, CrowdStrike goes in and makes images, so digital images of the DNC server. Those digital images, those ISO files, are then taken to CrowdStrike's headquarters. The FBI, when they look into this, they never actually investigate the DNC server. They go and look at these images. And those images, of course, when there's steps in place, are nowhere near the same as looking at the server itself. This, by the way, is one of the things that a lot of people who are I was a human intelligence guy, I was not a cyber guy, but that's every single cyber analyst I've talked to that really looks at this says that's not how you're supposed to do it. You go to the server itself. And in fact, that's in the DNI whistleblower complaint because it does come from the cyber perspective. That's when they're talking about, yes, there's, of course, election infrastructure probes. They go on all the time. Every piece of, every cyber network is constantly getting hit with probes. That's just sort of the nature of the game. And, it's always sort of a parlor game to try to track back where it came from. So this idea that the FBI could with any specificity claim that it was 100% absolutely Russia, and then the Mueller investigation comes in and says, oh, it was definitely this unit and it was definitely this people. It was bunk. It was bunk from the start. They could not tie it down. And the fact of the matter remains that they themselves even knew from the very start that they couldn't claim with specificity that it was, in fact, Russia. It may have been Russia, or it may have been a leak. And there's a lot of questions about the speed of the download when it comes to these emails that I've been told again and again that you can't get that type of download speed when you're transferring files. We've all tried, we've all been there with downloading files, right? That if you're trying to transfer that many files with that much information all the way around the world, it's going to be much slower. However, these come out so quickly, it looks as though someone had root level access to this server, which would be more in line with someone who had direct access, physical access, which would lead you to think that it may have been a leak.
How deep does the rabbit hole go? Here's the email, Jack. I just want to get your response to this because this is what is being called the smoking gun email that Hillary Rodham Clinton, approved the idea that Trump and Russia, hackers hampering the U.S. elections, and that they should distract people from her own mishandling of emails. And then it goes on to talk about the Soros Foundation and say that George Soros personally knew about this operation and presumably was funding it, because we've never seen a funding source. We know how much the Steele dossier cost. We know what Fusion GPS was paid under the table and over the table. And we've never seen the funding source. So it's looking like the conspiracy has now pulled in the Soros family. And then potentially Hillary Clinton's direct approval. Are we going to see subpoenas for Hillary here? Does Hillary Clinton have some type of immunity in all of this? I haven't seen a Hillary Clinton pardon, and she's never been president, Jack. So thoughts?
No, Hillary Clinton doesn't have immunity here. Obviously, this Julia, we need to track that down as well. But let's not forget also who was Hillary Clinton's foreign policy advisor on the 2016 campaign, someone who very publicly took the ball and ran with it. And if you just go and look on Twitter, who was the first person who ever, and as far as I can track, and me and ALX, I'll put him up as the guy who's better than me at tracking and archiving Twitter, is
Jake Sullivan.
I think the very first person who ever tweeted that Russia and Trump had this type of collusion and from this level with hacking was Jake Sullivan. And Jake Sullivan was the foreign policy advisor for Hillary. He tweets this before she goes and gives her speech. Remember, by the way, she was supposed to give a whole speech about this. And this is one of the other weird just mysteries of 2016. She had announced that she was going to give a speech about this. Jake Sullivan's talking about the speech that she's about to give on it. But Benny, she never gives the speech. So there was an announced speech from Hillary on Russian hacking and the collusion between Trump. Speech never takes place. The Alpha Bank scandal, that planted story in the Washington Post that totally fizzled out. Wall Street Journal was involved, saying that there was a bank server communicating between Trump's tower and Russia, which isn't how computers work at all. Was this whole thing. And Jake Sullivan, who and it's as crazy as this all is. We need to keep putting this in context. That Jake Sullivan becomes the national security advisor. He was working directly under Victoria Nuland. And these people started a war. They started a very real war that is ongoing right now on the ground in Ukraine, where as many as 1 million people, 1 million Christians, 1 million Europeans have been killed in all of this. These people were playing with fire, and they set the entire continent of Europe on flame. And by the way, they could have started World War III, and they don't care. And they say it's our fault. They say it's our fault, and they say you guys are Russian agents, and you're racists, and you're all of this. You were the ones who started all of this. You were. And did you ever think for a second how the Russians would respond? How the Russians would take it when you were accusing them of hostilities, when you were accusing them of criminal malfeasance and perfidy? Of course, you were accusing them of criminal and acts of war. If you're accusing them of acts of war like this against your nation, against your sovereignty, then how would they respond? They would think you were gearing up to go to war with Russia. And of course, that backs them into a corner as well. Benny, these people could have started World War III and gotten us all nuked, and they don't care. They just don't care.
They just want to cover up all of this. I think that it's remarkable that this evidence even still exists, given the fact that Jake Sullivan had a full run of the government for the last 4 years, and Republicans were just so cucked they couldn't ever dig this stuff up. Or Matt Gaetz was saying they didn't want to look mean and call Brennan and Comey and Clapper out in public. I think now it has to happen. Is it too little too late? I don't know. I'm glad that we're getting it. I guess this would be my question to you, given your background, Jack, and my final question to you. Given your background working within our military and in our intel services, we have this tweet from Bongino that has gone viral, and it's him just saying, listen, man, you can't run a country like this. And this stuff has shook me to the core, and I'll never be the same. And we assume that he's looking at sort of the data that we're seeing now, and perhaps far more and far deeper. How do you fix a problem like this? This is going to happen again. It's not like the op's going to go away, right? How do you fix it?
You've got to. So what you've got to do, and what Tulsi Gabbard over at DNI has done that's been so remarkable is she is now wielding the power of the Director of National Intelligence in a way that no one has ever done before. Because prior to Tulsi, the DNI has always sort of traditionally, since it's been set up in, post 9/11, has always deferred to the agency heads. And prior to the setup of the DNI, the CIA had ran all of intelligence, ran the entire IC. The 16 intelligence agencies that are out there, and then 17 if you count the DNI, even though it's sort of a umbrella type organization. It's really only been a clearinghouse ever since then. Now, the ICA is put out by the DNI, but even then, the CIA has extreme influence over the National Intelligence Council, the President's Daily Brief, and these intelligence community assessments. They're supposed to speak with the voice of the ICA, which, by the way, isn't supposed to be how intelligence works. None of this is supposed to be how intelligence works. What she's doing is now using the statutory authority of the Director of National Intelligence to say, no, I'm the director. We are cracking this entire thing open because these various agencies wield their power by controlling information in these little silos. And Benny, not to get into too classified stuff, but the way some of these, when people say compartments or compartmentalized information operations or intelligence operations, whatever it might be, counterterror, the compartments could be so small that one or two people might be the only ones who even know the full picture on anything. So something like Jan 6, something like PatCon, the conspiracy that roped up Oklahoma City, or things involving Waco and Ruby Ridge and the informants that were run. There may only be 1, 2, or 3 agents that even know what was going on, and you're not even talking to other agents that are out there running separate operations into the very thing that you're looking into, because everyone's stepping on each other's toes. This is how they maintain their power, and they use their allies in Congress, they use their allies in Senate to do the same thing, and they hide it all behind, well, we're protecting you for your own safety. We're doing it for your own good. I could go on for hours about this, but the entire intelligence agency and our entire national security system is broken. It needs to be cracked open. It needs to be cracked apart. It needs to be gutted. It needs to be fixed and rebuilt from the ground up, as well as the J. Edgar Hoover needs to be leveled and rebuilt from the ground up to create some kind of organization that serves the American people and not the interests of this shadowy national security state.
I think the only way to do that would be what we're doing right now. And the best disinfectant is sunlight, Jack, and we appreciate you shedding a considerable deal of it on this topic. And we hope that you're back time and time again to talk with us about this, because there's very few people that hold the kind of deep command of the subject matter like you. Everybody follow Jack Posobiec. You probably already do. He's got 3.1 million subs on X. And he's got one hell of an intro there at America Fest. Jack, we will see you, my friend.
God bless, buddy.
God bless.